Hello everyone.
Mẹ con cháu
Con chào.
xin chào
Xin chào
mọi người.
Nhâm ơi.
Xin chào các bạn.
Xin chào các bạn. Today we're going to be reading chapter 1 of Bill Clinton My Life. We read the prologue a couple of days ago, so now we're going to be reading chapter 1.
Okay. I got.
Early on the morning of August 19th, 1946, I was born under a clear sky after a violent summer storm to a widowed mother in the Julia Chester Hospital in Hope, a town of about 6,000 in southwest Arkansas, 33 miles east of the Texas border at Texarkana. My mother named me William Jefferson Blythe III, after my father, William Jefferson Blythe Jr., one of the 9 children of a poor farmer in Sherman, Texas, who died when my father was 17. According to his sisters, my father always tried to take care of them. He grew up to be a handsome, hardworking, fun-loving man. He met my mother at Tri-State Hospital at Shreveport, Louisiana, in 1943, when she was trained to be a nurse. Many times when I was growing up, I asked my mother to tell me the story of their meeting, courting, and marriage. He brought a date with some kind of medical emergency into the ward where she was working, and they talked and flirted while the other woman was being treated. On his way out of the hospital, he touched the finger on which she was wearing her boyfriend's ring and asked if she was married. She stammered, "No, she was single." The next day, he sent the other woman flowers, and her heart sank. He then called mother for a date, explaining that he always sent flowers when he ended a relationship. 2 months later, they were married off, and he was off to war. He served in the motor pool in the invasion of Italy, repairing jeeps and tanks after the war. He returned to Hope for mother, and they moved to Chicago, where they got his old job back as a salesman for the Manby Equipment Company. They bought a little house in the suburb of Forest Park, but couldn't move in for a couple of months. And since mother was pregnant with me, they decided she should go home to Hope until they could get into their new house. On May 17th, 1946, after moving their furniture into their new home, my father was driving from Chicago to Hope to fetch his wife. Late at night, on Highway 60 outside Sykeston, Missouri, he lost control of his car, a 1942 Buick, when the right front tire blew out on a wet road. He was thrown clear of the car, but landed or crawled into a drainage ditch to reclaim swampland. The ditch held 3 feet of water. When he was found after a 2-hour search, his hand was grasping a branch above the waterline. He tried but failed to pull himself out. He drowned, only 28 years old, married 2 years and 8 months, only 7 months of which he had spent with mother. That brief sketch is about all I ever really knew about my father. All my life I've been hungry to fill in the blanks, clinging eagerly to every photo or story or scrap of paper that would tell me more of the man who gave me life. When I was about 12, sitting on my Uncle Buddy's porch in Hope, a man walked up the stairs, looked at me and said, "You're Bill Blythe's son. You look just like him." I beamed for days. In 1974, I was running for Congress. It was my first race, and the local paper did feature a story on my mother. She was at her regular coffee shop early one morning discussing the article with a lawyer friend. When one of the breakfast regulars she knew only casually came up to her and said, "I was here. I was the first one at the wreck that night." He then told Mother what he had seen, including the fact that my father had retained enough consciousness or survival instinct to try and claw himself up and out of the water before he died. Mother thanked him, went out of her car and cried, then dried her tears and went to work. In 1993, on Father's Day, my first president, the Washington Post, ran a long invasive story on my father, which was followed over the next 2 months by other investigative pieces by the Associated Press and many smaller papers. The story confirmed the things my mother and I knew. They also turned up a lot we didn't know, including the fact that my father had probably been married 3 times before he met Mother, and apparently had at least 2 more children. His father's other son was identified as Leon Rithandler, a retired owner of a janitorial service from Northern California. In the article, he said he had written me during the 92 campaign, but had received no reply. I don't remember hearing about his letter, and considering all the other bullets we were dodging then, it's possible that my staff kept it from me, or maybe the letter was just misplaced in the mountains of mail we were receiving. Anyways, when I read about Leon, I got in touch with him and met him and his wife, Judy, during one of my stops in Northern California. We had a happy visit, and since then we've corresponded in holiday seasons. He and I look alike. His birth certificate says his father was mine, and I wish I'd known about him a long time ago. Somewhere around this time, I received information confirming news stories about a daughter, Sharon Pettigrew, born Sharon Blythe in Kansas in 1941, to whom my father later divorced. She sent copies of her birth certificate, her parents' marriage license, a photo of my father, and a letter to her mother from my father asking about our baby, to Bestie Wright, a former chief of staff in the government office. I'm sorry to say that, for whatever reason, I never met her. This news, breaking in 1993, came as a shock to Mother, who by then had been battling cancer for some time. She took it all in stride. She said young people did a lot of things during the Depression and the war that people in another time might disapprove of. What mattered was that my father was the love of her life, and she had no doubt for his love for her. Whatever the facts, that's all she needed to know as her own moved towards the end. As for me, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it all. But given the life I've led, I could hardly be surprised that my father was more complicated than the idealized pictures I had lived for nearly half a century. In 1994, as we headed for the celebration of the 15th anniversary of D-Day, several newspapers published a story on my father's war record with a snapshot of him in uniform. Shortly afterward, I received a letter from Under Baron of Netcom, New Jersey, recounting on his own experiences during the war and after. He said that he was a young boy in Italy when the Americans arrived, and that he'd loved to go to their camp, where one soldier in particular befriended him, giving him candy and showing him how engines worked and how to repair them. He knew him only as Bill. After the war, Baron came from the United States, and inspired by what he had learned from the soldier who he called him Little Gil Joe, he opened his own garage and started a family. He told me he had lived the American dream with a thriving business and 3 children. He said he owed so much of his success in life to that young soldier, but hadn't had the opportunity to say goodbye to him. He had often wondered what had happened to him. Then he said, on Memorial Day of this year, I was fumbling through a copy of the New York Daily News with my morning coffee, but suddenly I felt as if I was struck by lightning. There in the lower left corner of the paper was a photo of Bill. I felt chills to learn that Bill was none other than the father of the President of the United States. In 1996, the children of one of my father's sisters came for the first time to our annual family Christmas party at the White House and brought me a gift. The condolence letter my aunt had received from a congressman, the great Sam Rayburn, after my father died. It is a short form letter and appears to have been signed with the autopen of the day. But I hugged the letter with all the glee of a 6-year-old boy getting it on his first train set from Santa Claus. I hung it in my private office in the second floor up of the White House and looked at it every night. Shortly after I left the White House, I was boarding U.S. Air shuttle in Washington for New York when an airline employee stopped me to say that his stepfather had just told him he had served in the war with my father and liked him very much. I asked for the old vet's phone number and address, and the man said he didn't have it, but would get it to me. I'm still waiting, hoping that there will be one more human connection to my father. At the end of my presidency, I picked up a few special places to say goodbye and thanks to American people. One of them was Chicago, where Hillary was born, where I all but clinched the Democratic nomination on St. Patrick's Day, 1992, where many of my most ardent supporters live, and many of my most important domesticated initiatives in crime, welfare, and education were proved effective, and of course, where my parents went to live after the war. I used to joke with Hillary that if my father hadn't lost his life on the rainy Mississippi Highway, I would have grown up a few miles from her and probably never would have met. My last event was in the Palmer House Hotel, scene of the only photo I have of my parents together, taken just before Mother came back to Hope in 1946. After the speech and goodbyes, I went to a small room where I met a woman, Mary Etterrees, and her 2 daughters. She then told me that she had grown up and gone to high school with my mother and had gone north to Indiana to work in the war industry, married, stayed, and raised her children. Then she gave me another precious gift, the letter of my 23-year-old mother had written on her birthday to her friend, 3 weeks after my father's death. More than 54 years earlier, it was more than 54 years earlier. It was vintage, Mother. In a beautiful hand, she wrote of her heart, breaking her determination to carry on. It seemed almost unbelievable at the time, but you see, I am 6 months pregnant, and the thought of our baby keeps me going and really gives me the whole world before me. My mother left me the wedding ring she gave my father, a few motivating stories, and the sure knowledge she was loving for him too. My father left me the feeling that I had to live for 2 people, and if I did it well enough somehow, I could make up for the life he shouldn't have had. And his memory infused me, at a younger age than most, with a sense of my own morality. The knowledge that I, too, could die young drove me both to try and enjoy the most out of every moment of life, and to get get on with the next big challenge. Even when I wasn't sure where I was going, I was always in a hurry.
Yeah, thank you, Chugni. Good job. Repeat today. Do you remember what they say?
Yeah, told you how his father died, and trying to see if he could get any more memories of his father.
So we finished the reading today. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we see everybody next time. Let's say good night, everybody.
Alright, good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Xin chúc ngủ ngon.
Chúc mừng nha mày. Chúc mừng nha.
Chúc ngủ ngon.
Chúc ngủ ngon.
Chúc ngủ ngon.
Chúc ngủ ngon.
Tạm biệt mọi người nha. Love it.